and go to the US Botanic Gardens. Now, prior to reading the book and changing the way I think about these sites, if someone had asked me, hey, are there any monuments to first ladies? I might have said, well, there's the Eleanor Roosevelt statue, and that's sort of a monument to a first lady, amongst other things that she did. And I would have considered the First Lady's garden at the Botanic Gardens just part of the Botanic Gardens. But I think now when people ask me that question, I'm going to say, yes, there is a monument to the First Ladies, and it's at the US Botanic Gardens. I'm going to change my own framing on that. So what is this water garden at the Botanic Gardens, and how did it wind up there?
And I'll be honest, when I started this book, I had no idea that there was a First Lady's water garden. I've been to the United States Botanical Gardens, I've walked the grounds, I've been there, and it just never registered to me that there was a designated space within the botanical gardens that was specific to first ladies. That was something that Kaitlin brought to my attention, and that another guide had brought to my attention. But it is, people do ask all the time, like, where are first ladies honored? And this is one of the ways. So I think the story of this is kind of remarkable. In 1994, 6 of the 7 living first ladies got together. So we're talking about Lady Bird Johnson and Rosalind Carter and Betty Ford and Barbara Bush and Hillary Clinton and Nancy Reagan. The only reason Jackie Kennedy Onassis isn't there is she's too ill to attend, but she signs off in support of this endeavor. But these living first ladies get together and they attend an event to start to fundraise for an element of the botanical gardens that acknowledges the first ladies. And we do an entire tour at Toho on the first ladies. It's fascinating when you really think about what a first lady is. Lady Bird Johnson says that a first lady is an unpaid public official elected by a constituent of one, her husband, right? Michelle Obama described it as being in sort of this sidecar to history, like you're along for the ride, but you're not driving the vehicle. You come into this role, there's usually an incredible amount of public scrutiny, and yet you are not being paid for your work, but you're expected to do something. And no matter what you do, you're sort of facing a lot of criticism and I think judgment on what a first lady is or isn't. And so for all of these women to come together and sort of say, we think we should be acknowledged in some way, I think that's really, really special. Now that's 1994. It's going to take about 12 years for this to actually be fundraised, developed, and created. It's a great example of a public site that honors women's history and their legacy. But again, there's not a lot of contextualization. It's a beautiful public space. The garden itself is inspired by Martha Washington's quilting pattern. So the quilt pattern that Martha Washington regularly utilized. And you can see examples of this at Mount Vernon. They have a couple of Martha's quilts, as does Tudor Place actually has a quilt that was done by Martha Washington, which is also in the book in Georgetown. But if you walk through, it's not as though there's a listing of first ladies. It's not as though there's stories of these first ladies presented. But I do appreciate that it's an acknowledgement that there is a series of women in our history that have played this really important, pivotal public role that somehow has no definition in our Constitution and does not exist in any official way. And yet we immediately recognize as a key public figure. So it's really kind of a beautiful space. And I encourage people to visit the botanical gardens, but hopefully you'll walk away wanting to know more about the women that it sort of represents. And I would personally love to see more representation of our first ladies in public spaces in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's one thing that I often tell people, especially when I'm talking about Eleanor Roosevelt, that absolutely blows their mind is that the Constitution doesn't talk about a first lady. It doesn't require a first lady. We've had a president who was unmarried. We had a president who was widowed, and they found a woman to fill in that role. But there could be no first lady or first gentleman or whatever title we want to choose. And that would be constitutionally and legally just fine. And the fact that we have kind of carved this out and said culturally we have to have this is extremely interesting to me. And whenever folks ask about a monument to first ladies, this is definitely going to be on my list from now on. One more exhibit